I'm Jason Furman. I'm Deputy Director at the National Economic Council, work on pretty much the whole range of economic issues, but certainly right now my biggest focus is on the Buffett Rule. Important vote in the Senate next week, and really glad you're all here to talk about it.
Awesome. Well, to kick things off, Carmen, do you have a question that you want to start with, or I actually open it to anyone in the Hangout?
Sure, I'll go first. Could you explain how the Buffett rule affects those who are not millionaires?
It would have no direct effect whatsoever. And it's important to define a millionaire. A millionaire isn't someone who has a house worth $1 million or has $1 million in their retirement savings. It's someone who makes $1 million each and every year. And for them, it would make sure, phased in, that you pay at least 30% of your income in taxes. If you make less than $1 million, it doesn't directly affect you, but indirectly, it's part of a broader economic policy that has the type of balance we need so that we're making investments in the middle class with things like education. So we're not raising taxes on the middle class to deal with our deficit and pay for tax cuts for the wealthy. So indirectly, it'll help all of us.
Awesome.
Okay. So I guess if we're going to go down the line, my question would be, given today's political climate, how does the White House and specifically, obviously, the president plan on conveying the economics behind the Buffett rule? And additionally, on top of that, how do they plan on conveying the long-term benefits of the rule outside of just saying how much money it's going to generate versus the amount of debt that we have? So rather than just simply saying, say 47 billion over X number of years, how do they plan on conveying that message that they feel this is something that needs to get put through?
We're trying to convey it every way we can, and one of those is through a Google Plus Hangout. And if you all have any other ideas for us, we'd love to have them. But let me tell you some of what we're doing. Just this week, the president was in Palm Beach 2 days ago talking about this. Yesterday, he was at the White House, and we brought a lot of millionaires, and they brought their assistants. And they stood with the president and talked about how the millionaires shouldn't be paying less in taxes than their assistants. On Tuesday also, we put out a great report that's on the White House website called the Buffett Rule, a basic principle of tax fairness. It's pretty short, it's pretty simple, and it goes through a lot of the key facts, things that are just astounding, like tax rates in the top 0.1% are half of what they were 50 years ago. And then we're trying to get it out through social media. But you're right that the important point is not just this rule itself, but that it's also a broader symbol of the debate that we're having right now between two economic philosophies, and whether you want tax cuts for the rich at expense of everything else, or whether you want a more balanced approach to our economic problems.
Okay, so I had a question. I've been looking at the Buffett rule, and what the problem that it's intending to solve, this high income bracket that's paying a low rate. And what it looks like is that by and large the reason they're paying that low rate is from capital gains taxes being so much lower than our regular income taxes. Why aren't we doing something? It seems this Buffett rule seems kind of like a band-aid on, kind of, we're treating a symptom rather than treating the cause. Why aren't we looking directly at capital gains tax?
I think that's a really fair point and a fair question. And there's a lot we're going to need to do in our tax code. The president would love to reform our entire tax code. There's a lot of problems. You just named one. Another one is that a lot of our incentives in our tax code are upside down. We give a high-income family twice as much tax incentive to save as we give a middle-income family. Another problem is just how complicated it is for people to do their taxes. We'd love to do all of these. It's a lot to bite off all at once. It takes a certain amount of time to develop it, work with Congress, which is why we said, let's not wait to reform the whole tax code. let's not try to solve every debate. Let's just take one really simple, really common sense idea. If you're a millionaire, you shouldn't pay less in taxes than the middle class. Try to get that done first, and then everything else could follow. But certainly one of the things you'd want to look at in tax reform is the capital gains rate under the president's plan. It would go up from 15 to 20. An important thing he did for high-income households is make sure that your Medicare taxes apply to your not just your earned income, but also your unearned income, including your capital gains and dividends. And we'd want to take a look at that and reform. But rather than wait, do everything later, let's just try to do this one simple thing now.
Cool. I have a question too. So in regards to the Buffett rule, now as someone who's I have some experience with AMT, and kind of how that came about was where the threshold wasn't adjusted for inflation. And when I hear the $1 million threshold with the Buffett rule, is that going to be a fixed amount, or is that going to be adjusted for inflation as well, so that maybe 20 years from now, families that as the dollar weakens, they aren't going to be running up to this threshold of the original purpose of this rule?
Yeah, no, the goal, Tim, would certainly be to adjust it for inflation. And the AMT has a couple problems. One is it wasn't adjusted for inflation, so it hits more and more middle-class families. But two is the AMT itself has a lot of loopholes in it. So a lot of the millionaires who are paying less in taxes in the middle class aren't even on the AMT. And so we have something where, first of all, you'd want to index it so it never hits the middle class. But second, there's no loopholes at all. It includes all income. It only allows one deduction in Senator Whitehouse's bill, which is the charitable deduction because of the broader social benefits. It doesn't allow any other deductions, treats all income the same. So we really want to learn from that experience with the AMT. And no one should use that as an excuse to not do something about the problem. It just means we need to do it in the right way.
Okay, but did you say it was going to be indexed for inflation?
Yes.
Oh, it is. Okay. Thanks.
So what I understood, I saw somewhere that there would be one loophole in municipal bonds, and I was wondering if perhaps you could enlighten me a little bit more about why, from my understanding, those are tax exempt, and why that's the case.
Sure. The Senator Whitehouse's legislation is just based on your adjusted gross income. And that includes your capital gains, it includes your dividends, it includes your interest. It doesn't include your municipal bonds because that's exempt. And he just chose the simplest route, which was not to try to redefine adjusted gross income, but to go with what's already on the tax form. I think the only significant thing that's not included in AGI is municipal interest. So that's the route he took. It's certainly a reasonable choice, and the president's very supportive of Senator Whitehouse's bill. The philosophy there is that infrastructure investment is very important. Infrastructure investment has broader social benefits than are just captured by any individual or any municipality. And so it makes sense for the federal government to subsidize that. A lot of that happens at the state and local level. And so what we do is we'll say we'll make it easier for you to raise money to invest in roads and bridges and ports and everything else. We'll make it easier for a state or a city to raise money for all of that by having a tax exemption. Again, in reform, you could take a look at whether there are better ways to do that incentive, but for now didn't want to take that incentive away without putting in place any alternative to it.
Okay, that makes sense.
I'll turn it over to Tim also to ask a question.
Hey, Jason. I wanted to ask a question. I asked a bunch of my readers yesterday, if they had questions about the Buffett rule. One of the questions they had is this just sort of a gimmick for the election year, something to talk about and get people excited? And a lot of the critics of the Buffett rule said, hey, they're talking about fairness, which is important, but the big problem right now is jobs. And I'm curious if you can talk about if there's any relationship between the Buffett rule and the administration's tax agenda and helping create more jobs in the economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the president's job is to push ideas that are really important and explain why they're really important. And then, if those ideas don't pass Congress, people should ask their senators why it is their senators didn't vote for it. They shouldn't ask the president why was it that he pushed a really great idea that would have been great for the economy. So I wouldn't look to us, I'd look to them. But in terms of jobs, something like this is part of an overall economic strategy. And the types of tilting the tax code towards the wealthy that we saw in the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts, that was part of an overall economic strategy that contributed to an economic expansion where we actually lost private sector jobs, where the typical middle-class family actually saw its income decline. And so the Buffett Rule is part of our attempt to really reverse and undo that failed economic strategy. And you're not going to be able to make the types of investments we need in infrastructure and education. You're not going to be able to keep taxes down for the middle class if you're not bringing some fairness into the system when it comes to high income. The Buffett Rule, though, isn't the president's only economic idea. Last year we had we had votes in the Senate on investments in infrastructure, on saving jobs for teachers, and those were blocked on party line votes. Now we're continuing to push tax cuts to encourage small businesses to create jobs, and all sorts of other ideas that are directly focused on job creation. But this is one part of that overall agenda, but it's an important part of that agenda, which is why he's talking about it.
Thanks.
Well, everyone had to go. I'd now open it up for.
Corey, don't you have any questions?
No, they asked all mine. Well, yeah, I have a question for the group. I mean, is there anything that you'd like to follow up on, or any other questions that you want to pose to Jason?
I just had a question. What's the what do you think the actual effectiveness of this rule is going to be? Because there's been a lot of tax legislation over the years and over the decades, actually, and it just mean that the wealthy is just going to move assets offshore and try some other loophole in the tax code.
I mean, the simplicity in this is that it only leaves one thing, which is charity, and other than that, it closes everything else. You just look at your AGI, multiply by 0.3, that's what you need to pay in taxes if you're a multimillionaire. So try to keep it as simple as possible, and sometimes the simplest things are the most avoidable. Will somebody 10 years from now think of some new thing that we've never thought of before? Maybe, and we'll have to take a look at that, but we certainly are doing everything we can to prevent it. You did raise an important point, though, about offshore, and that's something that companies do right now. They shift their profits overseas. They pay foreign taxes, which in a lot of jurisdictions might even be as little as nothing. And then they don't have to pay U.S. taxes until they bring the money back here, and a lot of them never bring the money back here. So you have a lot of companies right now who are avoiding paying U.S. taxes, and that's a real incentive to locate your production overseas, ship your jobs overseas, have your profits overseas. So the president has another proposal. It's different from the Buffett Rule, but it's similar in spirit, which says if you make profits overseas, you should have to pay a minimum amount of taxes back to the United States immediately. So we want to get both at the shifting profits overseas by companies in a lot of the same ways we want to get rid of the different loopholes that let high-income households lower their taxes here in the United States.
Thanks.
Jason, do you have any questions for the group or anything? I mean, this is definitely meant to be a dialogue, so.
Well, I'd love to hear, what ideas you all have for us to get the message out, and what you'd like to see, what else you'd like to see on the agenda. As I said, this is an important idea, but it's only one part of our agenda. And, we're always looking for new ideas, and we're always looking for new ways to communicate them. So this is a great chance for me to hear directly from all of you.
Well, I actually have a question, Jason, and just in general, I suppose. We're talking about the Buffett Rule right now, which applies to individuals making over $1 million a year, and I believe it increases the tax bracket for somebody making below that as well, but only a very small increase. So I believe it was in 2006, it was reported that GE apparently had made $14 billion in profit and paid zero taxes on all of that money. So insofar as, obviously this is something that we need to talk about on the individual level, but is there anything that's planned to close the kind of tax loopholes that are allowing companies like GE to get away with paying $0 on $14 billion in income?
Mm-hmm.
And is there a corporate equivalent of simplifying the tax code and making things more fair, the way that the Buffett Rule does for individuals?
That's a great question, and gets at some of those issues I was trying to talk about, at some of the parallels between corporations and people.
Mm-hmm.
And the corporate loopholes are much more complicated than the individual ones, and their lawyers are extremely good. We have in our budget about $200 billion worth of specific proposals to close corporate loopholes. And it's things related to a company that makes all its profits overseas, doesn't pay US taxes, but then, even though they don't pay taxes on the profits, they decide that they can deduct all the expenses that went into generating those profits in the United States. So they get all the deductions and none of the taxes. That's one loophole we would close. Some of them the president's talked a lot about are things like oil and gas companies get a lot of special tax breaks. That's another one we'd close. Some of them are things as impossible to understand as if you buy an airplane for a commercial airline, you get to depreciate it in a certain way. If you buy the same exact aircraft, but you're a corporation and you're going to fly your CEO around in it, you get a tax break relative to what that passenger jet gets. It makes no sense at all. So we have about $200 billion worth of ideas like that in our budget. One of the most important ones is this minimum tax, so that you're paying a basic amount on any income that you're earning overseas. We'd love to do all those as part of a broader corporate tax reform, because if we could get all those loopholes out of the system, we could actually plow some of that money back into a lower rate for our companies. We do have the highest rate in the world. That it does matter. And it's not because our companies are overtaxed, it's because we're making up for all those loopholes. If we didn't have those loopholes, we wouldn't need to make up for those loopholes, and we could have a smarter, simpler system where you were actually paying taxes, but really paying a lower rate, especially when you were investing and creating jobs here in America. So that's what we'd love to do. It's even more complicated, though, as I said, on the individual side. And on the corporate side, that's one where I can tell you with certainty, even if we got everything absolutely perfect, we'd need to come back and continue to plug holes as new tax avoidance measures were discovered.
Right. And is there somewhere, I know that actually the White House website does a very good job of chronicling all of the policies of the president and the members of Congress and things like that. Is there anywhere, you said that there's $200 billion worth of these ideas, of these tax loopholes that you can close. Is there somewhere online, maybe on the White House website, that's easily accessible, where I could see a list of the things that you guys have planned? And also that kind of, I suppose that kind of ties into the visibility that you guys are particularly worried about with getting the word out there about these things.
Right.
Is there I can access that?
Right. So for corporate taxes, if you just Google the President's Framework for Business Tax Reform, I would guess that the first item, or one of the top items you'll get on the White House website and on the Treasury website, is our framework that we have for business tax reform. It explains all those loopholes and explains how we'd like to reform the business tax system. The other good document is a blueprint for an economy built to last, or an America. I think it's Blueprint for an America Built to Last. Again, just Google that. You'll find it on the White House website, and it's about a 6 or 7 page high-level overview of the president's agenda that he laid out in the State of the Union. If you want all the gory details, go find the president's budget, and that lists, the 30 different loopholes we're closing, and has, long boring descriptions of each one of them. But the place I'd start is those first two: the framework for business tax reform and the blueprint for an America built to last.
Okay. And
go
I have
ahead.
a link to them in chat, by the way. So I did some looking while Jason was talking. I found the links that he was talking about. So if anybody wants to refer to them, they are in the chat sidebar.
Oh,
Thanks.
you know more about this than I do.
Jason, another question that my readers had, talking about the Buffett Rule, the vote that's coming up in the Senate this week or next week, it's probably not going to pass Congress, I would say, this year. And I'm curious, have you guys thought about, given that fact, some more ambitious ideas that people are talking about, whether it's a carbon tax that can help with revenue and energy issues, or maybe a VAT, or some of the more esoteric things that people are saying, 20 years down the line, people like Greg Mankiw or Larry Summers are saying this is what we need to do. Have you thought about that and letting the president sort of look into the future even further and talk about good policy options?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, Tim, as you know, the president has pledged not to raise taxes on any household below $250,000, and we put out a budget that can accomplish our goal of cutting the debt as a share of the economy and stabilizing it while keeping that pledge. So we've shown that you really can deal with our budget problems and have a sustainable debt without raising taxes on households below 250, because one of the big problems we've faced in recent decades has been that squeeze on the incomes of middle-class Americans, and the president wouldn't want to make that any worse. But certainly we are, so those aren't ideas that we want to go to. But there are bigger ideas than the Buffett Rule. Some of them are in the president's budget, and they're things that we want to, be able to build a conversation and keep talking about. We'd love this to pass next week, but if it doesn't, in November and December, all the tax cuts are expiring. Big spending cuts that neither party in Congress wants to see happen goes into effect. There's going to be a real conversation about how to deal with all of that, and the president's going to have a lot of leverage in that conversation. And
do I see a little glee in your eyes?
Now will help. Would love to see it pass now. It'll help us in that debate at the end of the year as well.
Well, I'd like to turn back to the question that Jason posed to all of you, which is, we're doing things like Hangouts to help explain the issues. We just put out a White House whiteboard video that explains the Buffett Rule in sort of plain language. But what are your ideas as far as, how we can keep getting the message across and sort of other priorities in your lives?
I think it's almost incumbent upon us. I mean, we're here in the Hangout and people are watching, but I mean, we all have networks that we could, direct the information to and have healthy conversations about the Buffett Rule and any other initiatives that the Obama administration puts forth. So I'm looking forward to that, gathering the information that Chris put in the chat and the information that I've gathered here with you guys and spreading it around to the people I know and my different organizations like the Birmingham Urban League Young Professionals or any other groups that we're a part of. So I think that's the next step.
One thing that I think you guys are doing. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I actually I agree with Carmen. I think that there does obviously lie a certain amount of responsibility on the people that are interested in things like this, that are not necessarily position holders in the cabinet. You guys can only go so far. You're doing a great job so far, though. But I think that it's important for people to kind of like I know I told everybody that I know that I'm going to be in this little Google Plus Hangout. It's fascinating to me. But I mean, things like this it gives somebody, I think, something to be excited about more than anything else. So I know that I was chosen out of a couple of a small handful of people to voice my opinion, and that was exciting for me. So I'm able to tell other people about that. So I think that the technology that you guys are leveraging, like Google Plus, Facebook, Twitter, etc., and in particular these Hangouts, because of the kind of informal, off-the-cuff nature of them, gets people excited. It allows them to tell their friends, because it's easy. It's not as easy to go tell somebody to read the president's economic policy. It's easier, however, to get them a link to go to in in their spare time and watch a couple people chat and, you know, see what they think and kind of get boots on the ground that way, as it were.
Well, Tim and I were just in the chat. We were talking about one of the tools that we recently put out on the White House website. There are two tools that are kind of interesting. There's the federal taxpayer receipt that actually shows a breakdown of where your tax dollars go. And then another tool that we put out, and I will certainly share this link with all of you, and it's definitely up on our Google Plus page, is this Buffett Rule calculator. Which is pretty neat, and you basically put in a little bit of information about yourself, and you can find out actually how many millionaires are paying a lower effective tax rate than you are. So one of the things that we're always doing at the White House, working with Jason and on the digital strategy team, is just sort of trying to figure out tools that help explain the issues that are really important to us.
And that's a good tool for people to look at, even if they're not thinking about the Buffett rule. I think when people think about government spending, they don't always understand the ratio. So it's nice to see where the money that you're paying next week actually ends up in the government, especially if we're all talking about deficit reduction right now.
Yeah.
Oh,
Turns out that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, nothing important. Would love to hear what Christina was going to say.
Okay, sure. If you want a tool that helps simplify some of these concerns about our fiscal policy, it would, be really helpful if there was like a simple breakdown of the different, the actual impact of different ideas that you have, say the Buffett rule is going to bring in so many possible billions of dollars, and then but we still have a large gap there that that's just one piece of our fiscal policy that would help us balance the budget. There's got to, I know there must be, several other items, and if those were all kind of listed out and simplified so you can see, where we're going as a whole.
Mm-hmm. So we've tried to do that in different places. As I said, there's this, the Buffett Rule, a basic principle of tax fairness. And Corey or someone with more facility can post that link here.
Will do.
Okay. And then if you look at something like our budget, and there's some simple fact sheets that go with our budget on the OMB website, they explain how our ideas all fit together in terms of how we want to deal with our fiscal problems. And we have a lot of spending cuts in our budget in addition to our revenue, and how we balance those and put that all together with the investments that we think are so important.
One thing that I can recommend if you want to see sort of how the whole big picture comes out is the New York Times and also the Center for a Responsible Federal Budget have these calculators online where you can look at like the whole budget all at once and choose different options. Like there's probably like a Buffett Rule option, or like cut defense spending, or do this to Social Security. It's like a menu of things that the White House wants to do and people in Congress want to do, and you can sort of mix and match and see how it will like affect the budget overall over time. And it's sort of a neat way to put that in perspective if you want to see the 30,000 foot view.
Nice. And you'll find out it's hard, but it's not impossible. And especially if you're trying to bring some balance and put everything on the table, it's a lot easier than if you say, you have to cut taxes for the rich as part of your plan to cut the deficit. That makes it a lot harder, and means you can't do it without things like telling 19 million people on Medicaid they're gonna, be out of luck and lose their health insurance.
I think we're about out of time. I want to thank so much Jason for joining, and for everyone that's joining this Hangout from around the country. This was fascinating. We keep on experimenting with different platforms, and I hope you all enjoyed it, and we certainly welcome your feedback. So Jason, unless...
No, just same, agree with Corey. This has been terrific. My first Hangout. So thanks for all being so nice and welcoming, and hopefully Corey will let me do another one.
Absolutely. We're gonna hold you to it. So I'll definitely post all of the links that were mentioned today on our Google Plus page. And I hope everyone has a great day. So thanks all for joining.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.